we're finding more now that some people just aren't ready for like full on brain retraining yet. And so you actually have to start like more gentle and simpler with like some vagal exercises. Everyone's so individual. So it's kind of like finding what tools you actually like. And those are the ones that you're going to find easiest to do. The best nervous system tools are the ones that you're actually going to do.
So many of you have asked about MCAS, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, and for good reason, because it often shows up hand in hand with conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. And when I recently spoke to the Mast Cell 360 team, I was struck by just how much overlap there is. It's incredible. Different diagnoses, but underneath many of the same nervous system and immune patterns that we see again and again in the recovery stories here. And that's exactly what we're exploring right now. I'm Raelan Agle, and here we dig past the confusion to uncover the puzzle pieces that really move people forward when conventional medicine runs out of answers and you're told that there's no way out. But we know that that's just not true. Hundreds of people have shared their recovery stories right here on this channel, and the common threads are just too strong to ignore. Joining me right now are three incredible experts from Mast Cell 360. Kimberly Quirk, who's worked with hundreds of MCAS clients and brings both deep training and lived experience. Jamie Fries Miller is with us, who bridges anthropology, health coaching, and the realities of just modern life. And Kam Uchihara, who went through her own severe illness and now guides others with compassion and expertise. And together, right now, we're unpacking things like why histamine is never just about food, how MCAS fits into the bigger chronic illness picture, what conventional care often misses, and most importantly, where to start when everything just feels very overwhelming. It is absolutely an honor to have Kimberly, Jamie, and Kam here. I'm so excited for this conversation. So let's dive in. Ladies, it is so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having
Window.
us.
Yeah.
So I was saying, this is my first time, I think, ever interviewing three people at once. So I'm going to do my best to navigate through this, but I think this will be a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to
Mhm.
getting all of your perspectives and just so many, yeah, just insight from all three of you. This is going to be wonderful. And this is a topic that we haven't talked about a lot on this channel. So I'm really excited to do a deep dive into it. I know a lot of people watching, listening have conditions like ME/CFS or long COVID. So for those that might not be familiar, I think a good starting place would be just to explain, what MCAS actually is and why it so often actually shows up alongside these conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID.
And so mast cell activation syndrome is basically your mast cells are your frontline guards of your immune system. So they are activated and they're kind of something is triggering them that they're activated and trying to protect you as essentially what's happening with mast cells. So it's something in could be in your environment, something you're eating, something like that is activating the system, your immune system, your nervous system, and those mast cells are becoming overreactive. And we become sort of hypersensitive and intolerant to things because it is defending us so strongly against. And sometimes it doesn't, you don't know what you're reacting to. So it is like an over immune reaction.
And maybe that's an assumption that I'm making. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but is it something that you are seeing that is coming alongside of conditions like long COVID and ME/CFS?
Yeah, we do see it quite a bit, and it spiked quite a bit with long COVID. Sometimes for many of our clients, even when we're trying to get the root cause, long COVID's a piece of it or a part of it. But there are some things that are sort of under the surface. So like it might be the tip of the iceberg or the thing that tipped the immune system over to
Mhm.
become overreactive. And then underneath there is sort of what we're looking at to figure out what is keeping that immune system overreactive.
Yeah, I definitely do see the parallels because we talk a lot about the nervous system in relation to long COVID and ME/CFS, and it can become overactive or hypersensitive. So I'm wondering also with mast cell activation syndrome, do mast cells interact with the nervous system? Is there that connection there as well? And, is that connected for people dealing with fatigue and pain and those post exertional malaise crashes?
So yeah, those mast cells and those nerve cells constantly talking back and forth, back and forth. So if one is dysregulated, whether it be the immune system or the nervous system, it talks back to the other. And it's like, oh no, there's an alarm. It sends a chain of alarm, right? And they can be self-feeding and kind of build too, right? So those mast cells are pretty much where all our nerve cells are. So they're constantly talking back and forth because what does the body care about? It cares about our survival first.
So this might be too big of a question. I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead, but I'm thinking with that interaction, at that interaction, that interplay between all of this, when looking at overcoming conditions like MCAS and long COVID, is it something that you have to tackle separately, or is it similar protocols and approaches when working to move past this? How does that work when someone is working on their recovery from these different conditions?
Yeah. So usually we're looking holistically at people as a whole because mast cell is very much a very whole body kind of thing. You're having symptoms in more than one area. So it's not just digestive, it's also the nervous system and the skin and neurological system and just all the different areas. So definitely it's a matter of looking holistically what's going on symptom wise for many of us. I mean, from my perspective, I see chronic fatigue as a symptom of mast cell and what's going on with the body holistically. So I know, and all of us here have been through mast cell and have experienced some of that. So I know I thought I had chronic fatigue for a very long time until I discovered mast cell because fatigue was one of my hallmark things that I had going on with my body.
Yeah, I think we put a lot of emphasis on like the diagnosis, right? People are kind of looking for somebody to tell them what's actually going on and what's wrong with them so that they can then be like, oh, now I have an answer and I can solve that answer. And, knowing that so much of your channel deals with chronic fatigue, I can tell you so many times in my life where I've had that, as Kimberly said, as a symptom, where it's just like the overburden or burnt out feeling and just so tired all of the time, barely able to get out of bed. So I've had that multiple times throughout my life, but it has come and gone, and never an official diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, and actually never an official diagnosis of mast cell activation syndrome either. But both times feel like, especially with the suggestion that I had MCAS, um, about 2 weeks of anger because I was like, "Ugh, one more thing to deal with," but also then relief and empowerment. So I think every time we get a little bit of information, the more we can see that as the empowerment of, "Okay, now I can take control of my health." And I think that's so much of what our community and your community are dealing with. It's like, now that I know this, what can I do? Because I feel like we can only do the best we can with the knowledge we have. So just looking at your health journey as like an opportunity to gain little pieces of your individual puzzle. And then it's like, what do I do with that? And like you said, we both talk so much about the nervous system. It's literally at the top. And I think that was a game changer for me. It was just like, oh, my nervous system is trying to keep me safe. And so many people don't actually know what nervous system work means. I think in layperson's terms, obviously not your community, they know, but like stress management. We are all
Yeah.
stressed. And what is that stress? Is it an environmental stressor or thoughts and internal stressors? Or is it an ongoing viral stressor in the body like long COVID or Epstein Barr or mold toxicity, right? What is stressing the body? So whether most people think of stress as the mental piece, but ultimately stress can also be a real physical stress. And it's like, how do we manage stress? And the nervous system work is like, okay, like let's get back to the basics of getting and feeling safe in our body. So I don't even remember your original question, but I'm kind of like, yeah, there's definitely the overlap between the chronic fatigue and MCAS. They can totally go hand in hand. We see MCAS kind of as like the secondary pop up of there's been a dysfunction in the body at some level. And usually we classify it as at least two areas of the body or two
Mm.
systems.
So,
Yeah.
if someone is experiencing those chronic fatigue symptoms and they're trying to get at the core of what's happening, how would someone determine if MCAS was something that they were facing? What does the diagnostic criteria for that look like? What is the process?
The diagnostic criteria. So this is the thing. Mast cell activation syndrome is a newer diagnosis. There is a lot of controversy in the medical world about how you diagnose it. I would say a lot of our clients who come through don't have a full diagnosis, but generally they're saying you need to have an elevated tryptase is one, or elevated mediators from the mast cells. It's really hard to get that test right because it's a urine test. Though, and if the lab doesn't do it right and store it right, those mediators don't hang around long. You lose them. The second thing is having symptoms in more than one area of your body. So that's kind of the diagnosis, but it can be super frustrating to get that diagnosis. Um, Sometimes we say it's not necessary to have the diagnosis, right? It's more like let's get underneath what's going on that's triggering it, because the diagnosis can get you sometimes the meds, but there's a lot you can do yourself without those meds to quiet the symptoms. And there's a lot you can do to quiet the symptoms and kind of calm things down and move things forward and kind of get at the different layers because there's lots of layers.
Yeah, it seems that there are so many of these conditions that fall under an umbrella. And that's what we're finding here on this channel, which is why we talk about so many different conditions, is that people are finding more success in their recovery by focusing less on whether it was vaccine injury or long COVID or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome or whatever it might be, because those paths to eliminating symptoms seem to have far more in common than they do difference. So that's why I was wondering, how important is it for someone who's watching right now? Like, do I really need to deep dive on this MCAS diagnosis? And how important is this for me in finding my way past this from here?
That's the diagnosis part. But if you were going to visit us, the first thing we do is test for mold because one commonality that we have is it's probably about 90-95% have either have current exposure or past exposure. And that past exposure can hang around for a long time and be affecting our health and just kind of low grade, slowly decline kind of thing. And sometimes we blame it on, oh, it's my hormones shifting or I'm getting older or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Cam's story is a good example of what you just said. Like, okay, people get hung up on like the straw that breaks the camel's back. But I know when Cam and I both started working at Mast Cell 360, like we knew about mold, but didn't know how important that mold piece was. So I want Cam to share her story on that because like for her, it was like an overnight and we can get hung up on the straw that broke the camel's back. But like as you kind of undo the layers, you realize there's so much underneath that's kind of contributing to those symptoms.
Yeah, definitely. So one of my aha moments was kind of starting to look at the body as more of like a spider web, right? We've got all of these interconnected parts and pieces, and when you pull really heavily on one part, it moves everything else along with it. And if you pull too hard, you can break. So my entry into the MCAS world, or at least where it became a problem that was big enough that I had to pay attention to it, was vaccine injury. I fall into that crowd, and it was literally overnight. And it was severe. It was a lot of stuff that would have sent most people to the ER. At that point, I had found a group and they were like, we're going to the ER and they're not really doing anything for us. So we were all, huddled together and trying to figure out what was going on. And that's really where I first also heard about MCAS. And when I originally took it to my allergist, he's like, oh, that's a make believe diagnosis. And so I put it on the table and looked for other things for quite a while and eventually came back to it. And I was like, this is really the only thing that makes sense for me. And this is kind of like the gate that everything I'm trying really has to go through because my body is so reactive to everything. So fast forward about a year, my daughter was off at college. She actually caught COVID and just really never recovered. And it got to the point where we either had to support her in some way or she was going to have to drop out. So we moved, and we moved into, unbeknownst to us, a house that had mold, a bigger mold problem than we left. And we had air testing done, the standard protocol, industry, regular air testing. And they're like, oh, this house actually tests way lower than most other houses we've tested. So I'm like, great. And um, within about 2 weeks, my symptoms really started getting worse and worse and worse. I started with like trigeminal neuralgia, which is just like severe pain across that nerve that innervates your face. Um, Broke out in rashes, started having other problems. And at first, I chalked it up to, moving is stressful. We stirred up a lot of dust. I put a lot of stress on my body. And it just kept getting worse over time instead of better. And eventually, it got to the point where my stomach pretty much just shut down. Like I would put a bite of food in my mouth, I would chew it, and my body just would not swallow. And so I was living off of liquids. It was about all I could do to get 300 calories a day in me. I became cachexic. I was skin and bones, really. And that's when I went back to the MCAS piece and I was like, this is really where I've got to go. And so I just happened, to find one of my pieces of magic. And I really started going back and reading through all of the stuff on the Mast Cell 360 website, really digging into it. I had a doctor who knew absolutely nothing about MCAS, and she was good at listening to me. So when I brought all of my ideas to her and all this information, she was willing to, like, try some things out that were reasonable with me and stuff like that. But all that to say, for us, it took us another year and a half to really find the mold piece and to really wrap my head around this is what was going on. But it was a night and day. I was already in a place where I had, had some really significant health problems. And this was definitely connected to that move and the mold that was in the house now. So for me, there have been like these very clear lines of things that I can see that tipped me over, right? And the mold was a huge part of that.
And how is this? Forgive my ignorance on this. I'm still just learning about this, as many of us are. And when I hear about MCAS, I hear about things like histamine intolerance and cutting out certain foods. So, is that related? What is that all about? Can you explain a little bit about that?
So, I mean, you have histamine intolerance as a symptom of mast cell. And
Okay.
if you have mast cell, if your mast cells degranulate, they're going to let go of a lot of mediators or chemicals. Histamine's one of them. Histamine's a big one, though. And then you let go of that histamine, it triggers more mast cells, more histamine. So you start this chain of like triggering, and more comes out, triggering more, and that's like a mast cell flare. So histamine is very much related to mast cell. There can be people who have histamine intolerance who don't have mast cell activation as well.
And this is going to sound like a silly question, but can you explain what is a histamine?
Okay, so histamine is a chemical that your body makes or your immune system makes. So you want histamine. Histamine's not necessarily bad. So I just want to preface by saying that if you go and hurt yourself, get a cut or something, your body, your immune system's going to go there. Things are going to swell and get red. That's the histamine, right? It's the first line responders kind of going there, taking care, the immune system taking care of that injury. That's great. But if you have that throughout your whole body, that's chronic inflammation.
Yeah, and I also don't know how many of people in your community, like, deal with histamine intolerance or bring it up, but, like, or sorry, food sensitivities, I was gonna say, I don't know how many people with, like, chronic fatigue syndrome experience food sensitivities, but, like, it's a really that's a huge one. People start losing foods with MCAS because their body is just starting to, like Cam said, like, you pull one of the spider webs and it starts to kind of degrade a little bit. So we lose that gut integrity and things like that. And for me, food sensitivities were always kind of there. I didn't know I had celiac disease till I was 21. So autoimmune conditions often go hand in hand and kind of pre set you up for predisposition to MCAS. And so I was eating a normal diet. All of my symptoms blew up in college for me. And so looking back on it, like a lot of this is like, oh, I had that mold exposure. So I didn't my mold exposure was over a decade ago, but it was 8 years long between college and my first job postgraduate school within a building with visible mold. And so, like, you'd think that's a problem, right? And I had daily headaches, but that was like post undergrad. And then you go back and look at it, and it's like, wow, I had all these food sensitivities. No wonder I was tired all the time because my body's trying to break down. And, chronic inflammation causes fatigue, detoxing causes fatigue. So your body's trying to do all these things, and those are really energy intensive. But then for me, trying all of these different diets, trying to heal, right? We try all sorts of things to heal. I was eating I did the autoimmune protocol, right? I had autoimmune conditions, so let's try that. And it's like, "Oh, nightshades. I can't have nightshades." So I, like, gave up things like tomatoes. Would eat tomatoes and be fine sometimes, and then I'd eat tomatoes and not be fine sometimes. So that, looking back on, was like, "Oh, it's the histamine, it's not the nightshade. It's the histamine component of that tomato," and I was okay sometimes, but it was other times it would tip me over that bucket and I'd get the headache. So, like, the histamine piece, everyone has their own individual bucket, and what fills that bucket is different person to person, whether it's environmental triggers or stress and poor sleep, right? We're thinking about chronic fatigue, like, we're tired all the time, but then we have horrible sleep at night, and histamine dumping
Yeah.
can happen at night. So, when we can start to see how all these things are related. But for me, really learning about the histamine food piece was because I couldn't eat without my nose running. So, for those in your audience who aren't really familiar with histamines, they've most likely heard of an antihistamine, and they most likely have taken one during allergy season. So, like, you think like runny nose, itchy eyes as typical allergy-like symptoms, like, oh, seasonal allergies. People with MCAS kind of have those symptoms all year round. So, just to give your audience like a more simplified idea of like, oh, actually, I have seasonal allergies. What's going on is there's more environmental triggers in that season filling that bucket, tipping them over.
So, and perhaps we should have started here, but it sounds like when you're working with people who are facing these conditions, it's, stabilizing and supporting people with all these complex sensitivities. And I know you were part of something called Mast Cell 360. And so, if you could talk to us about what that is and how that approach perhaps differs from conventional approaches to supporting these populations, like what does supporting this look like with the work
Or
you do?
basically how it looks different is we are consulting firm. So we're not a medical. We don't have we're not going to prescribe anything. So we're not a doctor. It's more a consultative role that we're offering, and we're also not looking at it from diagnosis prescription. We're looking at it from a root cause, like a functional medicine root cause kind of thing. So, what is filling up that histamine bucket? What is causing all these symptoms in this person? And what can we do lifestyle wise, supplement wise, to really help lower that histamine bucket or that mast cell response so that things kind of calm down so we can get at kind of all the layers. And everybody's a little bit different, but I that mold piece is pretty universal across.
And so you mentioned there are lifestyle changes that can be made. What are some examples of that can help with this
Yeah.
condition?
We like to say clean air, clean water, clean food, and in that order. So if you think about clean air, and sometimes we don't think about our indoor air because we don't see it, but you breathe 20,000 times a day. That's the thing that you're consuming the most. And we did see an uptick in mast cell activation with COVID. People were home more, right? So if you had a moldy home, you were home more. So the clean air piece, the clean water piece, being really aware of what's in our tap water and being able to kind of clean that up. Um, and then clean food. And so, like the diet that's going to work for you, we usually start people with a low histamine diet, which still has a lot of variety, but just to see if it makes a difference. To really, if their bucket's already full, we might bring it down a little bit for them. It's not a long term diet. It's not something that's going to fix anything, but it can bring down that inflammation piece so that there's not too much histamine.
I was gonna say, Raylan also brought up the piece of stabilization, and so I think like what makes Mast Cell 360 different than a lot of approaches that some of our clients may have experienced with other practitioners is our order of operations. So, literally, at the top of stabilization is nervous system. So, we have to kind of calm the mast cells down and calm the nervous system down so to stop being so reactive to things in the environment that m- maybe aren't actually dangerous to the body. So, the mast cell activation syndrome happens when the limbic system, the vagal system are kind of dysregulated. We kind of get stuck in that fight or flight and we're kind of reacting to everything. So part of that lifestyle is I like to tell people, I'm like, your nervous system work is a reminder to yourself that you are worthy of work that time to work on yourself and really carving out a portion of your day, regardless of how long that is, because it's going to vary person to person how much nervous system work they need. But really the consistency of it as a daily routine and not waiting to try and like pull out the toolbox when you're in like this huge flare. It's like you mentioned, that's we have to work on stabilizing the clients, and we do that first and foremost with nervous system.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's kind
nervous system regulation is something we love to talk about on this channel and are constantly sharing strategies. So I'm curious, do you have any specific approaches or how do you go about that with the people that you work with?
Yeah, it's really I mean, our it's kind of what we're finding is like it varies person to person what degree they're able to handle. So we used to say like, oh, you need to do vagal, you need to do limbic, like brain retraining, and you most likely need to evaluate any structural impairments on the actual vagus nerve. So it's kind of like a three-legged stool. Like we had to do all of them because if you only did one, then the other one becomes hyperactive. We're finding more now that some people just aren't ready for like full on brain retraining yet. And so you actually have to start like more gentle and simpler with like some vagal exercises. And then everyone's so individual. So it's kind of like finding what tools you actually like. And those are the ones that you're going to find easiest to do. So I always tell people, I'm like, find one thing and just start there and do it. And then once that's become a habit, you can add something else onto that, but it's more about like building the habit first. The best nervous system tools are the ones that you're actually going to do.
well,
And
sometimes
what
less is more too.
Yes, we talk about that a lot here, that one of the best things you can do for yourself in the day is stop trying to fix yourself for big portions of the day. Find a little bit of joy, find a little bit of happiness. A very clear signal to your nervous system that everything's okay is having little bits of joy and doing things that
Yeah.
make you happy, and getting stuck in that constantly fixing yourself mode can often keep people stuck and keep you in these fear patterns. And I'm wondering how much, because the topic of fear comes up a lot here in relation to ME/CFS and long COVID, and with our fight or flight system, we're trying to send signals of safety. So, is that something that you're finding in your approaches as well? Just that trust in the body and the reducing the fear and how you
Yeah,
respond to your body.
yeah,
Yeah.
And yeah, we even say mast cell is all about getting back to safety in the body.
And it was
yeah.
actually your interview on our channel where you mentioned something about like chronic symptoms. And it's like when you notice that you're chronic symptom free. And like the three of us on this call right now with you, like we're all on our own healing journeys as well. And I actually told our group coaching program today, I was like, it's really about it's your healing journey is really this personal growth journey because you have to really get to know yourself. And that moment on our interview with you, I was like, wow, I actually am chronic symptom free for the most part. Like I do things to maintain it and I still have patterns. Like I know when I'm in a flare when I'm having my air hunger, or I know I've overdone the histamines if I have that 3 to 5 a.m. wake up, or and maybe my histamine bucket's a little bit higher, or I've been a little bit more stressed, or I'm not sleeping well when I get my monthly migraine in association with the hormonal shifts or right before ovulation. It's like my body gives me signals, but it's about kind of like changing your mindset of how those signals are like your body talking to you and having a different relationship with those symptoms versus like getting stuck in the fear of those symptoms.
Yeah, it's interesting. Every person I interview, my own experience is the same. It's just this. It's a challenging thing to explain, but coming through it is I don't want to say an internal transformation. It's not changing who you are, but becoming more of who you actually are and just how you move through life and your emotions and your experiences and your boundaries and your reactions to things. And it's
Yeah.
fascinating how it completely changes you and how so many people go through it, as hellish as it is, and as I wouldn't wish it on anyone, come through it saying they couldn't take it back because it's changed them and taught them so much and they're in such a different place. I'm curious if that's been the experience for any of you coming through this, that the learning has, I'm sure you've been through incredible suffering, but also there's that silver lining of the learning of who you are now as a different person than who you were before you went through this.
Yeah, I would say like there's almost like a mast cell personality to some degree, and some of us are very like type A, and we always pushed through and knew how to get through to things, and we would ignore those body signals, right? And then they started to really speak to us. So there are like like lifelong patterns that we might have had. We have some D1 athletes who are just used to overriding the body's signals and just pushing through. So that's a pretty common theme. Perfectionism is another. Control is another. Controlling for safety. So there's some real or not having boundaries is another.
People
So
pleasing.
yeah, so there are so many opportunities for a major shift in personal growth through this. And I know I've had it for sure because it's it made me do the nervous system work. It made me
Mhm.
really pay attention to my lack of boundaries at the time, and how did I get here, and how did I override my own body to take care of someone else, those kinds of things. So yeah.
Having that each of you have lived through this yourselves, I'd love to hear from each of you if there's one thing that surprised you the most in your recovery, or maybe one thing that helped you the most to keep you going. Because I know it, I'm imagining like all these conditions, you have to keep pulling yourself back up, and it's a really challenging thing to move through. So I know it's a big question, but it would be great to hear from each of you, just some pieces of your journey.
As I say, I remember, walking around my backyard at one point because I couldn't go very far. So I would walk laps in my backyard trying to get some movement in because then if I crashed, I could go back in the house. It was like 10 steps away instead of, half a block away. And I remember thinking, because I've always admired people who've been through hard things and had to find their way out. And that was really kind of like the spark that I put out in front of me to get through the tunnel. And I remember thinking about, what I wanted to let it turn me into and how I wanted to let it affect me and what I wanted to really like model for my children who were also going through some of this when we were going through that. And I remember thinking, first of all, it's a whole bunch of small decisions every day. I mean, yes, you have to make the big decision that that's the general direction that you want to go, but then you have to make like a whole bunch of little teeny decisions every day that keep you heading that direction, right? And it's okay to stop and like take a rest or camp out in some hard things every now and then and let that process. But really, you have to like make sure that you keep moving the direction that you're wanting to head. And the other thing I think was that I read a study by MIT, and they were like, it takes about 17 years for things to get from, clinical studies into clinical practice. And I just thought, I am not going to wait 17 years for some doctor to tell me what to do. I'm going to figure it out myself. So I think really for me, it was a combination of those two things, really deciding what I wanted to let all of it turn me into and also, taking that power into my own hands about feeling like I could actually figure it out and keeping that spark alive was huge.
I love that so much. It is very empowering. And that message of what do I want this to turn me into? I think that's a really important core thing to hold on to for so many things in life because challenges keep coming. And it's a really great perspective and mindset to have. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I
How
think
about from the rest of you?
I
Oh,
was gonna say with the idea of challenges are always going to come, like why that nervous system piece is so important. For me, that has come up so many times in my own journey where I even get like I think it happens to everyone. We get relaxed about it and then it's like, "Oh, right, I'm not taking care of my stress levels." But also so that's like one takeaway. It's just like don't underestimate that and also there are so many tools out there. So it's like they may switch. They may have there may be different tools that work at different times in your life. Like I know when I found out about MCAS, my mom has been the biggest supporter. So that's going to be my second thing is like finding the right support. But my mom was on MC360's website and was like, they have a nervous system course, like hint, hint. And then like, so obviously I did that. And then I found out, like, I learned more about breath work and like use those tools. And then I learned about cranial sacral and how like the biodynamic osteopath and body work and that energetic system, right? So there's so many tools that you can do, but I want to go back to so nervous system is one, don't underestimate it. Two, the right support system. It's like surrounding yourselves with the people who are really going to uplift you. So my background's in anthropology. Actually taught a whole college course on like how other cultures perceive wellness. But at the root of this, like we are all human and humans are social beings. So we are not meant to do this alone. And so I think like whether it's family that's supporting you or like outside community, whether that's an internet community or like wherever you find it, like even just a friends group that maybe they don't understand what you're going through, but like don't judge anything that you do to maintain your health in that way. I think that that's really important is like finding the right people that are going to support you. So like fire a doctor. If you don't feel supported or safe with that doctor, like find another practitioner. Find
Yeah.
somebody who gets it. If a family member doesn't get it, learn about those boundaries. How do you hold those boundaries with that person? And then where can you seek community and support in people who do understand what you're going through? I think is kind of my takeaway is like we are not meant to heal alone. And so how do you heal?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to me because all the people that I interview, for so many of them, and myself included, for years,
Mhm.
felt so
Yeah.
alone on these journeys when there are millions of people going through similar things around the world. And for a while, it was challenging because a lot of the online spaces were a bit doom and gloom and felt a bit like you're never going to get better. But now we have so much more information and so much more strategies for recovery. So there's not a need to go through this on your own anymore. And it's so powerful to be able to connect with someone who just gets it. It just, because I think many of us go blue in the face trying to explain it to the people around us. And if they haven't been through it, it's not going to click. And it's really powerful when you can have someone who's like, yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, and for me, I would say two things. One is trying to let go of that illness identity and seeing yourself well and hope is huge, huge, huge mindset. How did I do that? I mean, I went from like label to label. Like at first, it was like, oh, I have Hashimoto's. Oh, I thought I had chronic fatigue. I have chronic fatigue. And then I got diagnosed with Lyme. Oh, it's Lyme. It's the Lyme, and I'm a Limey. And I went and joined all these Lyme groups. And yeah, there was a lot of doom and gloom, and I had to be careful about which groups I joined. And then also needed to. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I don't maybe I unfollow, but I can still go and get the information that I need. But it's not in my feed all the time. So I was making some of those conscious choices around where I was going and trying to let go of that illness identity and not be focused on it 24/7. And the second thing is what I call the mast cell cha-cha, which is probably the healing cha-cha. And it's like two steps forward, two steps back, one step forward, two step back, and how healing happens and how it's not a linear thing and how mentally it is hard when you have what you perceive as a slide back to keep going and pick yourself back up and to keep going. And I think that's so important to do. I know a lot of us have like the all or nothing kind of mindset. So it's kind of trying to, have that ability to mentally pick yourself back up and do the baby step and not make it such a big step that you're gonna fail, right? Doing the little baby step because all those little steps up that mountain do equal the top of the mountain finally. It's just a little
Yep.
slower.
So important to zoom out once in a while because it can really feel like you're stuck sometimes when you're actually not. And you're making progress and then you're energized. You're like, yes, I'm going the right direction. And then you have a challenging day or week or a month and you think, wow, was I imagining all this progress? Am I really getting nowhere? But when you really do zoom out and you see the progress that you're making, that sort of bouncy trajectory going the right direction, it helps to keep you going, but it can be tough. It can sometimes feel like, man, I just keep facing the same things.
Yeah, we tend to focus
Like
on
I'm,
that negative piece of what's
yeah,
wrong versus what's right. So, like, gratitude can be huge, but also if
yeah.
you've journaled or done any kind of symptom tracking, kind of looking back 6 months or a year, like, oh wow, this one isn't such a big deal for me anymore, and you don't realize how much that's shifted. So that perspective change, yeah.
So through Mast Cell 360, what resources do you have available? What support is available if someone was looking to learn more from you, connect with you, to work with you? How do they reach you? How do they learn more? And what do you all have available to support people on these journeys?
We have a lot. Like I
That's amazing. I love that answer already.
there's really like this library of topics and things that you can learn for free on our website. Obviously, that was a huge part of the turning point for me personally. And then, we have lives every week, most weeks, either Facebook or YouTube. We've got clinic, for one-on-one support. And people can even email and ask questions. And we have, a small but mighty team that responds to those things.
We have courses as well, and we just launched recently, the three of us, our group coaching. So really trying to almost walk through people through the histamine bucket piece and how to lower your histamine bucket. If people are curious about mast cell, I do suggest going to the website because we do have a great quiz. I think it's called what is it called again, Cam? The multi symptom
Mystery
Why?
symptoms quiz.
Oh,
mystery symptom trap. Yeah.
I
So
was
it's
gonna
kind
say,
of
I
like,
was gonna say haywire mast cell quiz, but
yeah, it's been called different things, but it's usually pop up there, and it kind of and we have some great articles too where you can kind of check off like, yeah, this fits with me or this doesn't fit with me, and kind of seeing what it fits.
yeah, I remember when I did the symptom quiz, like we didn't have the mystery quiz yet where you can like check yes or no and it gives you like the beautiful answer. It was the blog post when I first found Mast Cell 360 and it was like I was going through and I was like, I'm a poster child for this. And then I started, so like my initial like going to their website, I was like, oh, I have to join their newsletter because this is like describing me to a T. And then within 2 weeks they were hiring and so I started working there and I was like, once I started to learn about our community, I was like, wow, there's such a broad range of clientele that we see in our community. It's like from hypersensitive to drinking water and having two foods to someone like me, where, I'm the most sensitive person in my friends group. And I'm sure many, many people in your audience feel that way. But like compared to some people, I'm like, wow, I'm robust. I can take supplements and I actually have a lot of foods that I can still tolerate despite me like being the weird person who has to go out and be like, do you have this menu? Can I modify this? Like, but occasionally I can still eat out. And so like there's a wide range, but I just think it's funny to like go through that quiz and to feel like like there's something for everyone on our website. Even if you don't identify with MCAS or don't have an official diagnosis or it's never crossed your radar before, it's like it makes you feel seen. The website makes you feel seen. I'll just put that out there.
Everything that you all have been sharing, there's so much overlap, and I know it's going to be resonating so much for people who are watching and listening. I just love all of this because so much of these resources seem applicable and helpful for so many of these conditions. So it's so incredible that you have all this available. And of course, all of this is linked in the video description, so people take a moment and go check out and see what's there. Free resources, extra help, absolutely incredible. I love what you all are doing. I might just ask you to finish up if each of you could just share. A lot of people who are watching and listening are still in the thick of all of this and feeling very overwhelmed and just really not knowing what to do next. So, is there one insight or piece of advice or one small thing they can consider doing this week to help, shift them in the right direction?
Yeah, we like to say at Massel 360 a lot, like, what are you curious about? So if somebody's listening to today's show and like they're like, oh, that I had never thought of, and it's kind of sparks that moment of curiosity, I'd say follow it. What's the worst that could happen? You maybe learn something new, and again, knowledge is power. So um, follow that curiosity, but also, remember to treat yourself with kindness and give yourself grace are my reminders.
Absolutely.
And I would say don't forget the basics, the real basics like sleep. Can you get some sleep consistency in? Simple, healthy foods. Hydration is huge, right? Sometimes we talk to people and they're not, hydrating well, and we're not going to feel good if we're not hydrated. So thinking about all those basics is important. Yeah, making sure they're kind of on point.
Absolutely.
I have to say, take a moment to remember that recovery is possible and to really, lean into those stories where people have, and to also remember that it often comes in layers and at a gentler pace than what we necessarily want or expect.
Well, this is absolutely incredible. I so appreciate all of your time. It's been so wonderful meeting all of you. It's great that you have so many resources out there for people. It is so moving to me that we now have so much available for all these people out there who are struggling, and people no longer have to navigate this on their own with all this guesswork, being told that there are no answers. There's no reason to have to stumble through this on your own anymore. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do. Again, encouraging people watching, listening to check out those links in the description, get the information, get the extra support. And I'll link up here as well the interview where you interviewed me and we talked a bit more about the overlap between ME/CFS and long COVID and just those overall recovery approaches. So thank you, in short. Thank you for being here and for all that you do.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for
having
having us.
us.
It's a pleasure.
And thanks to everyone watching. And I hope to see you in this next interview where we talk about this even more and share even more insights and resources. Thanks, everyone.